Bilirakis is recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. Mrs. Holcomb, back in the 2000s, it was recognized that there was a lack of good information on the safety and efficacy of drugs for the pediatric population. Can you talk about some of the incentives that came about to encourage more pediatric clinical studies?
So the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act, combined with the Pediatric Research Equity Act, have been a very successful way to get more drugs studied in pediatric populations so that information can go on the drug label and pediatricians know how to dose the drugs for children. The incentive that has caused that to be so successful was the addition to whatever regulatory exclusivity the company might have on its product for adults of 6 months for doing these pediatric studies. And we believe at BIO that incentives such as this one can be very effective in increasing the number of products that are developed in areas for which there is high unmet medical need, but very difficult populations or areas of interest, such as, for example, intractable antibacterial resistant conditions. These are tough, and there's just no good way of doing it. So incentives can be very effective, and they have been for pediatric studies.
What about the rare disease space? Again, there are about 500 approved rare disease drugs, but 7,000 rare diseases affecting approximately 30 million Americans. They're taking medication off-label, and I know the stories because I hear from my constituents on a regular basis. They take the drugs off-label, not knowing if their drugs are safe and effective for their conditions, or if it's proper dosage. That's so important. And fighting with their insurance companies on coverage of these medications. Does it make sense to incentivize development for a targeted population when there are clearly defined needs?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Last month, my colleague and I, G.K. Butterfield, introduced the Open Act for the second time. Much like the BPCA, it creates an incentive to run more clinical trials in the rare disease space where 95% of the diseases have no FDA approval treatments. This would bring more approved drugs to these patients. The Open Act has the potential to result in hundreds of new drugs and treatments for individuals with rare diseases. Only 150 rare disease patient groups, over 150 at last count, I think it's more than that, support this bill. The Open Act was part of the House 21st Century Cures Act, and while it fell out at the 11th hour, unfortunately, I'm going to continue to push for this legislation. It's a priority for me. Do you have any comments on that? And, of course, I welcome co-sponsors for this legislation as well.
So it's clear that without the Orphan Drug Act, we would not have 500 treatments for rare diseases. It's also a tragedy that we don't have 7,500. And again, we believe incentives can work. We don't have an official position on your proposal, but definitely it merits more evaluation.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and seeing no other members wishing to ask questions.